Welcome, friend, to a very special International Women's Day episode. Aboard the True Crime Express, I'm Shane Waters, traveling from across the pond in America.
And I'm Wendy, accompanying Shane on this unique journey through England. Today we're en route to Crimecon UK in London, on a train steeped in history and mystery.
And we're not alone. Along with us are podcasters from 9 remarkable true crime shows, all of which you'll find listed in the episode show notes. Each one will share a tale that intertwines the gripping world of true crime with the significance of Women's Day.
So let's embark on this narrative adventure. Welcome to our story.
Wendy, this train feels like a time machine, doesn't it? The wooden panels, the plush seats, and the rhythmic sway.
It's beautiful, isn't it? I love these old steam trains.
Oh, is it the food trolley?
It is, and pushing it is LaDonna and Amy from Deep Dark Secrets.
Snacks and a story. Let's hear it.
Today, we are going to cover another murder case connected to the death fetish community. Amy and I are advocating against online communities called death fetish. These communities, well, they glorify the murder of young women.
It's just horrible, and we hope that our advocacy will help put a stop to this industry while also helping to honor the victims. Today, we're going to discuss the murder of a 17-year-old girl named Georgia Williams.
Georgia was murdered by a 22-year-old death fetisher named Jamie Reynolds.
Georgia Williams was a beautiful redheaded girl. She was at the tender age of 17 with so much life ahead of her. She had big dreams and big plans. She intended to join the Air Force, and she was already making something of herself. She was a corporal in the RAF Air Cadets, and she had become the head girl at school. She was also a student mentor and liked to help out her fellow students. People described her as intelligent and popular. She loved the outdoors, and she loved spending time with her family, who were loving and supportive of her. She had the whole world ahead of her.
Georgia also had a lot of friends, and one of those friends was a man named Jamie Reynolds. He was just a few years older than her and lived in her neighborhood. Jamie and Georgia had been friends for a while. They spent time together, and they actually texted frequently, so they were pretty good friends. Jamie had even admitted that he had romantic feelings for Georgia, but she had turned him down politely numerous times. One of her texts to him read, "I just don't see you in that way. Just stop. I don't want to ruin our friendship. I told you last time, I just want to be friends." Georgia didn't know this, but Jamie had been in some serious trouble from law enforcement for quite some time for accessing death fetish pornography websites. He was sent to counseling for fixating on the murders of other girls like Georgia with red hair. Sweet, innocent 17-year-old Georgia had no idea what she had gotten into with Jamie Reynolds.
And she didn't know this. Jamie was writing a death fetish story about her coming over to his house and with her hair up in a ponytail, wearing red lipstick. In Jamie's story, he described how he would tie Georgia up and blindfold her. He described in very pornographic terms what he would do to her body while tied up. Then, he described himself taking Georgia upstairs, having her stand on a box, and slipping a noose around her neck. He wrote about how he would tighten the noose around her neck and demand that she dance for him. He described how he would sexually assault her and admitted in writing that he liked his girls dead.
And what happens next is absolutely horrific. He lured Georgia to his home under the guise of a modeling shoot. He told her he needed a model for a simulated hanging photo shoot. He used the word artistic, and he also described it as a, quote, fake hanging, unquote. And he reassured her it would be totally safe. Georgia trusted Jamie and agreed to be his model. And just like in his fantasy, he talked her into wearing red lipstick with her hair in a ponytail.
And it only gets worse from here. Jamie coaches Georgia to do the photo shoot. He convinces her to put her head in the noose, and then he slowly and sadistically murders her. After her death, he abuses her in every way possible before dismembering her and disposing of her body. After 5 years of viewing content on the death fetish pornography forums that glorifies the murder of young women, he finally acted on his desires.
Viewing and creating death fetish content isn't always harmless. In our work, we have seen way too many cases that end up like this, where an innocent victim, like Georgia Williams, is murdered at the hands of a death fetish predator. When Jamie Reynolds was sentenced, the judge in this case agreed that the death fetish pornography he was viewing had been an integral part of how and why Georgia's murder occurred.
We invite you to help us stand up for women by taking a stand against death fetish.
Their stories always stir the soul. Just like International Women's Day, which started as a fight for women's rights and has become a global day of celebration and remembrance.
Let's head to the dining carriage, Shane. I hear Robin from The Trail Went Cold is there, sharing his latest findings over tea.
Robin's ability to breathe life into cold cases is remarkable, much like how we remember the pioneers of International Women's Day, who breathed life into women's rights movements.
There you are, Robin. Come here, Shane. Grab a cup of tea. Please continue with your story, Robin.
I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about a courageous female survivor of an horrific crime. And appropriately enough, I had the pleasure of meeting the survivor at the American version of Crimecon in Orlando last year. I'm talking about Jane Borowski, who may have been attacked by one of the most infamous unidentified serial killers in the history of the United States. I first became familiar with her story when it was featured on Unsolved Mysteries during the early 1990s, but while Jane agreed to appear on the show to recount what happened to her, she only went by her first name and was interviewed in silhouette in order to conceal her identity. That was definitely an understandable decision, considering that this was only a few years removed from when Jane was originally attacked, and the perpetrator was likely still out there somewhere. The suspected assailant was known as the Connecticut River Valley Killer, as from 1978 until 1987, a total of 7 women were murdered within the same 50-mile radius of the Connecticut River Valley, located along the New Hampshire-Vermont border near Interstate 91. The names of the victims were Kathy Milliken, Mary Elizabeth Critchley, Bernice Quartermanche, Ellen Ruth Freed, Eva Marie Morse, Linda Moore, and Barbara Agnew. Well, it's never been conclusively proven that every single one of these women was murdered by the same perpetrator. All but one of them were found in remote wooded areas, and most of them had similar-looking stab wounds, so it was reasonable to assume that a serial killer might have been operating in the region. Well, during the late evening hours of August 6, 1988, 22-year-old Jane Borowski, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, may have had an encounter with the Connecticut River Valley Killer. After attending a county fair, Jane stopped at a closed supermarket in West Swansea, New Hampshire, in order to purchase a soda from a vending machine. When she arrived, a Jeep Wagoneer was parked in the lot, and after Jane purchased the soda and climbed back into her car, she was accosted by a white male who appeared to be between 30 and 40 years old. The man then proceeded to grab Jane, pull her out of the car, and threaten her with a knife while saying a bunch of stuff she didn't understand. He asked Jane if she was driving a Massachusetts car and accused her of hurting his girlfriend, but Jane had no idea what he was talking about. But the man was clearly in an angry rage as he violently attacked Jane and stabbed and slashed her a total of 27 times. The man then climbed back into his Jeep and drove away, leaving Jane for dead, but miraculously, she managed to survive the attack. Now, if Jane's ordeal had ended here, this would already be a terrifying enough story, but what happened next wound up giving nightmares to millions of people who watched the recreation of this situation on Unsolved Mysteries. Even though Jane was losing a lot of blood, she managed to make it back to her car and drive away in hopes of seeking medical attention. She decided to speed down New Hampshire Route 32 since a friend of hers happened to live in the area, but eventually pulled up behind another vehicle. Jane soon made the horrifying realization that the vehicle was a Jeep Wagoneer and she had managed to catch up to her attacker. Needless to say, Jane was terrified that this man was going to notice her, but she managed to make it to her friend's house, where she pulled into the driveway and honked the horn in order to garner his attention. When Jane crawled out of her car, her friend came outside to help her, but they noticed that the Jeep Wagoneer had turned around and was now slowly passing by the driveway. Even though the driver appeared to be staring at Jane from the front seat, he ultimately decided to drive off, and this turned out to be the last time Jane ever saw him. Paramedics were summoned to the scene, and Jane was rushed to the hospital, where doctors determined that she had a severed jugular vein, 2 collapsed lungs, a lacerated kidney, and severed tendons in her knees and thumb. Thankfully, Jane wound up pulling through, and while she was being attacked, she recalled doing everything in her power to protect her unborn baby. Thankfully, the child also survived, and Jane gave birth to a daughter named Jessica 2 months later. However, the attack did cause some medical complications for Jessica, as she wound up suffering from mild cerebral palsy. Since the series of murders in the Connecticut River Valley seemed to come to a stop, it's been theorized that if Jane's attacker was the killer, leaving a surviving witness behind may have prompted them to bring a halt to their activities. As the years went on, Jane Borowski eventually became comfortable enough to go public with her identity, as she has since done a number of interviews on TV shows and true crime podcasts. She used to believe that a specific suspect, who later died in an unrelated murder-suicide, was the man who was responsible for attacking her, but there was never enough evidence to conclusively implicate him, and Jane has since changed her mind and no longer thinks he was the perpetrator. I mean, for all we know, Jane's attack may be completely unrelated to the other Connecticut River Valley murders, and she just happened to cross paths with a completely different criminal. Regardless, all of these crimes are still officially unsolved, but even though this traumatic ordeal caused Jane to suffer from depression and PTSD, she is still spreading awareness about her story over 35 years later. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the privilege of meeting Jane at Crimecon in Orlando last year, and also attended a panel session where she recounted her experience. Perhaps the best moment of the whole affair was when Jane brought her daughter Jessica and granddaughter Cheyenne out onto the stage. According to Jane, the fact that Cheyenne even existed was proof that the monster who attacked her and her unborn daughter had not won.
Next, we have Kacey from the Cult Vault. I think she's in the observation carriage enjoying the view.
Kacey's insights give us a window into the complexities of human behavior, much like how International Women's Day gives us a window into the diverse experiences of women worldwide.
Look at this beautiful view, Shane. Let's take it all in while we listen to Kacey's story.
For the last 4 years, I have been interviewing survivors of cults, extremism, and coercive control. I have spoken with individuals from all manner of backgrounds all over the world, from political to therapy to religious to family cults. For International Women's Day, I wanted to share the story of one particular woman, a survivor of the very first cults that I researched. On the morning of November 18th, 1978, 10 individuals, including 21-year-old Leslie Wagner Wilson, fled for their lives through the jungles of Guyana. With her 3-year-old son Jakari strapped to her back, Wilson knew that this treacherous 30-mile hike meant life or death for herself and her small child. Wilson left behind 11 relatives, including her husband, Joe Wilson, her mother, sister, brother, niece, nephew, and in-laws. Wilson had no idea that this fateful morning would be the very last time that she would speak to those 11 loved ones, along with those in the community that she had known and loved since she was 13 years old. That this would be the last time she would kiss her mother, that this would be the last time she would see any of them alive. When Wilson was 13 years old, her sister had succumbed to drug addiction, fracturing the close-knit African-American family. The Wagners had heard from a friend about a drug rehabilitation clinic in San Francisco that was part of a community outreach program set up by an inclusive and racially diverse religious group, something rarely heard of in America in the 1950s and 60s. The PT rehabilitation program was part of a closed community that included schools, medical care, and even a dentist. The Wagner family was swept up into the religious movement, not realizing the dark roots and even darker path ahead due to the church's charismatic and unruly abusive leader. The name of the church was the People's Temple, and its leader, James Warren Jones, known commonly as Jim Jones. As years passed, Wilson became romantically involved with Joe Wilson, a deputy of Jones's. Together, the couple had a child, a baby boy they named Jakari. Controversy around Jim Jones began to grow, with former members and media blasting the leader for being financially, physically, and sexually abusive to his members. It was around this time that Jones began talking of a message that he had received of utopia and paradise on earth, and soon announced to his congregation that the People's Temple would be relocating to the isolated South American jungles of Guyana. Members travelled in small groups to avoid drawing attention from the media. Joe Wilson had taken Jakari to Guyana, causing Leslie Wilson to follow soon after. And by 1977, the church had established itself in South America, chopping down trees, building shelters ahead of Jones's arrival. The compound was named Jonestown. Jonestown had little food, and members were starving. With no running water and Jones's paranoia ramping up, congregants were subjected to sleep deprivation and severe physical punishments for speaking out or attempting to leave. Jones embarked on drug-fueled sermons that would last the entire night, beatings dished out to anyone who would fall asleep. Passports and money were all revoked from every member of the congregation. Wilson lived through 10-hour manual labour workdays, 6 days a week, in the harsh weather of South America, watching her husband drift further into Jones's madness and her son deteriorate alongside herself. Jones began implementing suicide drills, known as White Nights, where Jones would demand members drink a deadly concoction to prove their unwavering loyalty to him. Cult expert Jan Jalolich would call this bounded choice: drink the potion and die, or refuse and be subjected to hideous and humiliating physical torture. There really was no choice. Not once Jones had isolated individuals from family, friends, and a way out. Leslie watched her son turn 3, feeling she too had no way out. Jim Jones was soon notified that on November 17, 1978, Congressman Leo Ryan would travel with a team to investigate Jonestown. Leslie Wilson began noticing that something in the air had changed. When word got out that Congressman Leo Ryan would investigate Jonestown, Jones began instructing members on how to behave. Members should prepare what little food they had to make it look as if they lived with banquets. Jones's paranoia was mounting, and as he talked about how the government were finally here to take all they had built, just as he said they would, and in the panic of preparation for the congressman's arrival, Leslie Wilson began to make a plan. Included on the small plane that was due for an overnight stay was Ryan's aide Jackie Spear, the United States Embassy Deputy Chief of Mission Richard Dwyer, a Guyanese Ministry of Information officer, 9 journalists, and 4 concerned relatives. These relatives were the representatives of a larger group of concerned loved ones. Ryan's attention was drawn to Jonestown after receiving a large volume of communication from people who had lost family members to Jones, urging the government to look into the mistreatment of their loved ones happening in the secluded jungles of Guyana. After significant press attention and the continued effort of family and friends, the 17 individuals headed for the Port Kaituma landing strip to suss out exactly what was going on in Jonestown. Upon the small plane's arrival, Jones greeted the congressman, showing him the very best of Jonestown, asking members to tell Ryan just how they felt about Jonestown. Footage that was taken by the reporters shows members talking about paradise on earth, how thankful they are to Jones, how this is their home. On the morning of November 18th, Leslie Wilson felt in her gut that something terrible was about to happen. Wilson strapped her 3-year-old son to her back and covered him with a sheet. She set out on foot with 9 others to embark on a 30-mile treacherous hike through the jungles of Guyana, attempting to reach the next settlement, and with that, safety. The entire time Wilson moved through that jungle, she expected to hear the sound of gunfire, and she expected to be killed. Just as Congressman Leo Ryan and his team were about to leave the compound and return to the landing strip, notes began being passed to the news crew, with members silently pleading for help, expressing the need to escape, that they were trapped, imprisoned. Jones, sensing something was afoot, sent his lieutenants to check on the team and their small plane. Included in this team was Leslie Wilson's own husband. Back at the landing strip, a small number of Jonestown individuals approached the small plane, asking to be taken back to America and back to safety. At this moment, gunfire broke out. 5 members of Congressman Ryan's team were instantly shot dead. Leo Ryan himself, Don Harris, an NBC News reporter, Bob Brown, an NBC News cameraman, Patricia Parks, a defector from the People's Temple, and Gregory Robinson, a photographer for the San Francisco Examiner, lost their lives on that landing strip. Upon hearing what transpired by the small plane, Jones knew his entire operation was about to be exposed. The only way he could stop his members from being taken from him, from his empire being broken down by outside forces, was to destroy the entire thing, along with himself. Faithful members of the People's Temple followed Jones's orders to administer deadly injections to the babies, toddlers, and children of Jonestown. Other members drank from vats of cyanide-laced Flavor Aid, where others were forced to consume it by gunpoint or in restraints. There is archived audio of Jones instructing the mass murder-suicide of the People's Temple, with the screams of the children and the mothers being some of the most sobering, impactful, and heartbreaking things recorded to this very day. On November 18, 1978, 918 people lost their lives. It is estimated that over 900 members of the People's Temple died in what is known today as the Jonestown Massacre. Around 304 of those are thought to be children. This was the largest case of American mass death up until the events of September the 11th, 2001. Jackie Spear survived the Jonestown Massacre and became a congresswoman herself in the years that followed, advocating for the awareness of destructive cults. Leslie Wagner Wilson unknowingly continued her journey through the jungle, heroically saving herself and her son. Upon her return to America, Wilson talks about the hell she went through. She had 3 failed marriages, participated in drug use, and struggled with suicidal ideation as she attempted to piece her life back together. Wilson is now 66 years old. She is the author of a memoir, Slavery of Faith, the untold story of the People's Temple from the eyes of a 13-year-old, her escape from Jonestown at 20, and life 30 years later. She is also a professional motivational speaker who offers talks on the resiliency of the human spirit and the work it takes to bring you back to center. She also does talks on forgiveness, the path to healing, the power of love, and the signs of a cult. According to Wilson's website, Miss Wilson decided to use her experiences as a walking testimony that we can overcome all things through the power of love. She continues to advocate for those less fortunate through service. For International Women's Day, I have chosen Leslie Wagner Wilson as my inspirational woman. Overcoming the seemingly impossible, continuing to inspire, educate, inform, and grow through the most trying and traumatic of experiences.
As we walk through the train, let's chat with Dave and LaDonna from Extinguished. They're in the lounge carriage, I believe.
Their empathetic approach to storytelling resonates with the International Women's Day spirit of understanding and acknowledging diverse struggles.
On April 8, 2016, a parks worker in San Francisco discovered a dead woman's body curled into the fetal position. Her name was Nicole Fitz. Her young daughter, 2.5-year-old Ariana Fitz, was nowhere to be found. In fact, she remains missing to this day. With little movement in the case, in the spring of 2023, authorities put up a $250,000 reward for information in this case. Additionally, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an age progression picture of what Ariana would look like now. An official statement noted investigators and NCMEC believe Ariana could still be alive, and they're asking the public to pay attention to her age progression image. I kind of feel like somebody must have been listening because we just talked about this the last episode, LaDonna.
We did. And I think that it's really interesting to me that they believe that Ariana could still be alive. That tells me that there is most definitely information that has never been released to the public that they're holding back. Obviously, they have to because it's an open and active case. But there has to be some information that they have that would lead them to believe that she could still be alive.
Yeah, and after doing this for the last 3 weeks, I'm starting to believe that maybe she is out there alive. At least I hope so. And I do believe you. There must be something that we don't know that they're not releasing just so that they're waiting for that perfect time to go and hone in on that.
I completely agree. And I think now's a good time to really encourage our listeners to please go out and share the whole series of episodes that we're doing on this case, but also just do a quick Google search of Ariana Fitz and age progression photo. When it pulls up, it will come up with a flyer. You can also get it at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website. They will have a search engine on their website and you can type in Ariana's name. But if you will just take a moment to look it up, take a good look at the photo, who knows, maybe you've seen her. But more importantly, if you will take that photo and share it on social media, I think that that would be a huge positive in this case. If we can really get an army of people together who say, I'm going to share this information, it's time to get justice for Nicole, and it's time to bring Ariana Fitz home.
I agree. It has been far too long. And if that child is still alive out there, we need to find her.
I agree. I completely agree. And I also found some information where the FBI has released another statement that its search for Ariana has actually spread throughout the country. And they think some witnesses to Ariana's potential abduction or murder or whatever's happened to Ariana, they believe these witnesses have moved to various parts of California and Nevada. And if you recall, Nicole, which was Ariana's mother, she was a single mom. She reportedly hired a babysitter to watch Ariana while she worked evenings. And really, this babysitter and her husband and the babysitter's sister, they were supposed to basically be the stopgap for Nicole until she could pull herself out of homelessness, get her own place and really get stable. That babysitter, as we have reported in other episodes, her name was Helena Martin and her husband is named David, and her sister was also involved in the babysitting of Ariana Fitz. And so if you happen to know the Martins, even if they're going by different names now, I think that that's really important information to call and give to the FBI. Let's make sure that the Martins feel very uncomfortable wherever they're at until they decide to be cooperative in the disappearance of Ariana Fitz. Because I don't know about you, David, but I am incensed that they are no longer cooperating in this case.
So am I. And I think that's because they have something to hide. And I do think that since it's probably been so long up until 2023 that anybody said anything about this case, and they probably know that little people know about it, that they were beginning to feel real comfortable with that. The right thing to do is for them just to turn themselves in, because I do believe that they are the people that's done this horrendous crime.
No matter what's happened, if it was kidnapping and they have taken Ariana to live somewhere else so she could be their child, or they gave her to somebody else to raise, that's still a horrible crime. If they've put her into some sort of trafficking ring, that's horrible. Or if they've murdered her, or if they accidentally killed her and didn't come forward, all of these things are awful. But Ariana has family. She has aunts and uncles and other relatives that want to know what happened. And so I just really encourage anybody listening, if you have any information on this case or about the Martins, to please come forward.
Now, another interesting aspect in this case, if you recall from earlier episodes, Nicole's body was found in a small, shallow grave a few feet away from a playground. Her shallow grave was covered with a plywood board with a symbol painted on one side. And according to reports, the plywood board does not appear to have come from a location within the park. Police believe that the board that covered Nicole's body could be a clue. And according to authorities, it is their belief that the persons responsible for placing the coal in the hole brought that board with them. Police are also trying to identify the markings on the plywood in the hopes of locating where it came from. So what do you think about this aspect of the case? What could that piece of plywood be of importance to it?
I think this is an incredibly strange piece of information in this case. One, I'm shocked to think that police believe that the killer brought the plywood with them, because then that changes the landscape of this crime. So, in a couple of episodes back, we talked about, well, maybe Nicole went and met with the Martins and got her child back and then was met with foul play when she left the presence of the Martins. But the way the police are making it sound is that whoever killed Nicole brought the board with them, and a random killer is not going to be carrying around a piece of plywood. That doesn't make any sense to me. I guess they could have it in the back of a truck, but I think it's unlikely. I think it's really odd that a killer would have this plywood with them. So I'm very confused by this aspect of the case, and that police said that. So I'm very curious to why they think that. I'm also wondering if the plywood somehow ties back to the Martins' house or to another suspect. We know that police have gathered about 30,000 pieces of evidence in this case. Maybe there's some weird connection there, because I think, again, that's a really big statement for police to say, hey, we think that the person responsible for placing Nicole in the hole brought that board with them. Don't you think that's a huge, huge thing for them to say? I think that's a huge leap. So there's something that they know that we don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree. My mind kind of went to maybe they brought the board because they didn't want a household looking for something to cover her up with. Goes back to that symbol. Maybe they have some type of a gang symbol or some type of a symbol going to a cult that is known to try to throw the scent off of them. With them bringing that board, there's many scenarios that go through my head of why they would do that. But those are the first two that came up.
Very strange. Well, David, I did reach out to San Francisco police. What they did tell me is that they are actually calling Helena Martin and her sister persons of interest in the disappearance of Ariana Fitz. The other thing that the San Francisco police did tell me, and they cautioned me on this, they said, even though that we are calling them the persons of interest, it's important to remember that the babysitters have never been charged and that they have never been able to connect them in any way whatsoever to Nicole's murder. And so that just leaves me with one question. Is there ever going to be justice?
Wendy, what do you say we head over to the bar car?
You don't have to tell me twice. Mine's a large glass of rosé.
Look, there's Esther from Once Upon a Crime. She's got quite the crowd around her.
Esther's factual storytelling reminds me of the importance of truth, just like the true stories of women who fought for their rights.
On the morning of May 6, 2013, in a quiet working-class neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, cries for help were heard coming from a two-story home on Seymour Avenue. They sounded so desperate that one of the neighborhood's residents followed them to their source. He saw a young girl inside the front door at 2207 Seymour Avenue. She could be seen peeking out from the bottom of a storm door. "Help! I'm Amanda Berry," the frantic girl called out to him. "I've been kidnapped in this house for 10 years. She urged him to hurry, saying that her kidnapper, Ariel Castro, might be back any minute. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Another neighbor, hearing the commotion, came running to help. The men kicked at the door until a panel finally gave way, and the girl came rushing out. A little girl who appeared to be about 5 years old followed her. They ran across the street to another house, where Amanda dialed 911. She reported an incredible story. She told the operator she was the Amanda Berry who had disappeared 10 years earlier, just one day before she was to celebrate her 17th birthday. Amanda had accepted a ride home from a friend's father in 2003. His name was Ariel Castro. Castro had lured her to his home, chained her, and kept her prisoner ever since. A large-scale search for the missing teen was conducted at the time of her disappearance, and Amanda was featured on the national television show America's Most Wanted. At the same time, she was being held captive blocks away from her family, who later presumed her dead. She had been raped repeatedly by Castro. The little girl who escaped with her was Amanda's daughter, fathered by her kidnapper. She'd given birth to the 6-year-old inside the home, which was her prison. As shocking as Amanda's story was, there were still more horrors to be revealed. She told the 911 operator that there were 2 other girls still locked inside the house, whom Castro had also kidnapped. When police arrived, they searched the home and found 2 more girls upstairs. Michelle Knight ran out of an upstairs bedroom wearing only underwear. She jumped into the officer's arms crying, "You saved me!" In August of 2002, Michelle had disappeared on her way to a meeting with a social worker regarding her son Joey, who was not quite 2 years old. She got lost and stopped at a store to ask for directions. A man she recognized as the father of her cousin's friend, Ariel Castro, happened to be in the store and offered Michelle a ride. She accepted, was lured to Castro's house, and soon found herself chained in the basement. She was 21 years old at the time. She had been held captive, raped, beaten, and starved by Castro for over a year when Amanda became his second victim. The third girl found locked in Castro's home was 23-year-old Gina De Jesus. She was a 14-year-old middle school student when Castro, the father of a friend, offered her a ride home from school and was taken captive. She'd been a prisoner in Castro's House of Horrors for 9 years at the time of her rescue. Gina's family knew Ariel Castro well. He'd been a classmate of Gina's father when they were in high school. Castro was a 52-year-old school bus driver who was also a musician. He played with a popular local band in bars and clubs. Castro was divorced and had 4 children. His neighbors described him as pleasant when they had the chance to talk with him, but knew him as a private person. He didn't invite anyone to his house, nor did they see many visitors coming or going from the residence. Now they understood why. All 3 of the young women endured being chained and locked in the basement, and later on the top floor of the house. They were regularly beaten, raped, and deprived of food, showers, or fresh air. The house was dirty and cluttered, and Castro had only recently given them permission to cook hot meals. They had existed on a diet of fast food and junk food for most of their captivity. Castro began allowing Amanda more privileges, like the use of the kitchen, after their daughter was old enough to ask why Mommy was locked upstairs. The 3 freed women and the little girl were first taken to the hospital to be evaluated. All 3 were underweight. Amanda and Gina were released to their astonished and elated families the next day. Michelle remained in the hospital for a week. She'd been held prisoner the longest and was now 31 years old. She had received the most severe abuse. Michelle had become pregnant twice by Castro, and he'd beaten her until she miscarried both times. Ariel Castro was found nearby and arrested soon after the women were rescued. He was ultimately charged with over 500 counts related to the kidnappings, over 400 charges of rape, 6 counts of felonious assault, 3 of child endangerment, and 2 counts of aggravated murder for Michelle Knight's unborn babies. He was held on $8 million bail. Prosecutors intended to seek the death penalty. Castro pleaded guilty to avoid being put to death by the state. His plea bargain netted him a sentence of life in prison plus 1,000 years without the benefit of parole. Michelle Knight faced her captor and rapist at his sentencing. "You took 11 years of my life away," she said. "I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. I will overcome all that has happened, but you will face hell for eternity." 1 month into his life sentence, Castro was found hanging in his prison cell. He'd hung himself with a bedsheet, depriving his victims of the justice they'd sought. Let's hope Michelle's words about his eternal punishment were prophetic. "I will overcome all that has happened," Michelle declared in her statement. She spoke these words with conviction and then lived them out. Michelle Knight has reinvented herself, not wanting to be forever known as just one of the Cleveland kidnapping victims. She changed her name to Lily Rose Lee and wrote 2 memoirs, both bestsellers. She travels around the world speaking about being a survivor of trauma, rape, and abuse. She runs a foundation called Lily's Ray of Hope, supporting women and girls who have experienced domestic violence, human trafficking, and child abuse. Amanda Berry, now 37, works as an advocate to help families find missing loved ones. Hosting a daily news segment titled Missing with Amanda Berry on Cleveland television station Fox 8, she highlights missing persons cases that might not otherwise receive the attention they need to be solved. Her daughter recently celebrated her 16th birthday, the same age Amanda was when she was kidnapped. Gina DeJesus founded the Cleveland Center for Missing, Abducted, and Exploited Children. The nonprofit helps families receive the resources and support they need when loved ones go missing. As of 2023, the organization has helped more than 50 families. As part of her role with the nonprofit, Gina travels the country to help train law enforcement officers on how to engage with families of missing people. She chose to headquarter the organization on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, just down the block from the house that was her prison for nearly a decade. She did so to prove to herself and the community that she is no longer a victim and refuses to live in fear of the past. The house at 2207 Seymour was demolished as part of Ariel Castro's plea agreement. It is now a vacant lot. Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus not only survived their horrific ordeal, but have thrived since. They've created lives for themselves and used their experience to provide healing for others who have been victimized and to give hope to their families. Their strength and courage testify to the power of these women and others like them who have faced challenges that most might consider impossible.
As we head back to our compartment, let's listen to True Crime and Wine with Sherilyn Dale. She's just a few compartments down. I just love her YouTube channel.
Her dynamic storytelling echoes the collective efforts in the history of International Women's Day, where different voices come together for a common cause.
This case is one that will leave you speechless, enraged, inspired, and emotional beyond measure. It's one where the details come from the victim herself, someone with incomprehensible strength. Her name is Alison Botha. Alison was born on September 22nd, 1967 in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. She went to the Collegiate High School for Girls in Port Elizabeth, and after graduating, she lived it up and traveled for 4 years before going back home to settle into her life. Alison is described as a kind and fiercely loyal friend. She sent you cards and flowers on your birthday. When you went to her house, there were fluffy towels and aromatherapy bath products waiting for your cozy stay. She was also the friend that wanted you to be the best that you could be. She worked at a travel agency for a number of years and was really good at her job. And at 27, she was just living her best life, fully relatable to so many of us in our 20s or when we were in our 20s. December 17th, 1994, she spent the day at the beach with her friend and her friend's son. 2 other friends later joined them that evening, and Alison describes it as one of those unplanned nights that just kind of turned out to be really fun and full of laughs. The group ended up going to Alison's apartment for some board games and pizza, and at the end of the night, she told her girlfriend she would give her a ride back home. At 1 a.m. on December 18th, she drove her yellow Renault 5 that she called Reginald back to her house from dropping her friend off. And as she was turning into the area on Deary Street, listening to tunes, seeing the road lit by the moon, she was just reflecting on the great company that she had that day. She distinctly remembers just the calmness of that night. When she pulls into her parking lot, she sees the prime parking spot that she had when she left had been taken. So she circled the lot and sees one about 10 meters from her door. It's under a tree, so it's not well lit, but she's got to take what she can get. She pulls in, turns the car off, and like I'm sure so many of us can relate to, she reaches over her seat to grab some clothes on the passenger side. And as she leans over, she feels this warm air from the outside on her driver's side. And unable to even allow reaction time, she sees the face of a scraggly blonde guy holding a knife, leaning in her car in front of her face. She can't even scream. She just freezes, and he says, "Move over or I'll kill you." She does what she's told, and he climbs in. As he's driving out of her parking lot, which to her is looking at her comfort, she's so close to her home. And he tells her he only wants to use her car for an hour and he won't hurt her. He proceeds to ask her name. She says it's Susan, and he tells her his name is Clinton. They drive around through a rougher area of town for several minutes. As they're driving, they're passing people leaving clubs and parties, but for some unexplained reason, Allison felt like if she jumped out, she could be running into the arms of someone who knew this guy and wouldn't help her, and she'd be worse off for trying to escape. After scanning the crowd, the man driving sees another guy and goes, "There he is." He waves the other man over, and this person jumps in the back. Clinton introduces them. He says, "This is my friend Tians." As they're driving away from the crowd, she's looking around at the cars driving by her who have no idea what's going on. Most of them not even looking her way for her to even give a chance of some sort of signal for help. And then she starts seeing less and less vehicles as they drive out to an isolated area from the road where no one could see them. The car stops and Allison says, "So now what?" The driver says, "I thought you knew what we wanted. We want to have intercourse with you." I'm going to use it as a more proper term. She says, "No, I didn't know that." And he asks her if she was going to put up a fight, and she scans the area, knowing that her odds of escaping are extremely low and that she's defeated. At this point, both men assault Allison. And during this time, Tians, the man that was picked up, calls out to the driver and uses the name Franz. And Allison actually, so brave, calls him out and says, "Oh, so you're not Clinton." And she's right. It turns out Clinton was actually Franz Dutoit and Tians was Tians Kruger. These were two men who were both on bail for rape charges. Franz was the son of a police officer. He was problematic from an early age. When he was only 13, he set his school on fire and said it was because of his influence of listening to heavy metal music. This incident caused his whole family to uproot because his dad, being a police officer, didn't really look good that his son was torching, his school. His parents had sent him to the army after this to try to straighten him out. And after the army, he did meet and marry a young woman. They had a daughter and separated in 1990. And at this point, he moved to Port Elizabeth and got a job as a truck driver, but got fired pretty quickly because he was stealing money from the company. He met Tians, who was quite younger than him, and Tians looked at Franz as somebody that he could look up to and confide in. He had been living with family at the time, but said that he just felt like an outcast and felt unwelcome. Tians didn't have much guidance, so latching on to someone trying to teach him and give him attention was a recipe for disaster in the wrong hands, which was most definitely the case here. It's believed that Tians had undiagnosed PPD, making him more susceptible to other people's influence. It was February that year that he had abducted and raped a 20-year-old woman at gunpoint. He was released on bail on that occasion, and on December 4th, Franz and Tians both struck again. This time, they accosted and raped a 21-year-old pregnant woman. In this incident, they were arrested and appeared in the magistrate's court the next morning. And before the case had been assigned to a specific investigating officer, and before anybody could make a connection to the previous rape, the prosecutor didn't know about the other cases. So they were let out on bail again and free to kidnap and do the same to Allison. Now, if you think what she had gone through at this point was bad enough, unfortunately, her nightmare was only just beginning. The two men asked Allison if she would go to the police if they took her back. And she says no, because she would never want her parents to know what happened. They said that they didn't believe her, and a better idea was to kill her. They ordered her to undress, and suddenly Franz starts to choke her. Allison goes unconscious. She says she doesn't know how long it was, but when she regains consciousness, she sees movement above her and realizes it's one of them cutting her throat. She says, "You think you could feel something," but she felt nothing. She thought that it was actually a dream. She just laid there and pretended to be dead, knowing that it was her only chance of possibly surviving. The attack stops and she hears them walking away saying no one would survive that, and hears her car start up and drives away. She felt like these were her last moments and wanted to do something to catch her killers. So she spelled out their names in the sand around her. And she said she felt herself leaving her body. And it was really peaceful. She felt at ease. But then all of a sudden she felt this urge that she wanted to fight. And she didn't want her mom to lose her daughter this way. Just then she sees this flicker of headlights in the distance and pushes herself up. And when she moves, she feels warmth around her stomach. And it's at this moment she realizes the extent of her injuries. Now, this is hard to listen to, but I feel it's important to grasp the severity of what Allison went through and the strength that she really has. She looks down and she realizes her throat hadn't been the only thing that was injured. Her stomach had also sustained so much trauma that she was feeling parts outside that needed to be inside. She looks around and miraculously sees a denim jacket near her. She uses that jacket to hold everything in her stomach and starts crawling on one hand. Through moments of feeling like she couldn't go on, she manages to stand up on her feet. And when she does, she can't see in front of her anymore. She is aware that she's awake, but she says it's just black. And it's then that she realizes that the injuries to her neck were so severe that her head was tipped back so far it was almost between her shoulders. So she had to pull her head forward and start walking for help, falling along the way and getting up again and again and again, cradling her injuries. In and out of consciousness, she makes it to the road and makes sure to get in the middle of it so that no one drives by not seeing her. Now, it's been 90 minutes since she was kidnapped, and within a minute, she hears a car stop in front of her, but no one gets out. She waves to signal that she needs help, and she says just nothing. And she felt like it was hours, and then hears the car drive away. And while so many people might be angry, Allison said that she understood maybe why the driver didn't want to. Maybe they thought that they were getting set up and that they were scared for their life. And as she's forgiving this car for driving away, another car comes, and this car is exactly who needed to be there to help Allison. She sees a man come in her vision, and he's telling her it's going to be okay. It turns out he has just completed a year of vet school, and he's quite aware of anatomy. He describes just going into medical mode, trying to put certain parts of Allison back together until help arrived. And another miracle passerby shows up on the scene with a blanket that they always kept in their car. And actually, this story made me want to put a blanket in my car now forever, because remember, Allison has no clothes. It's 3:00 in the morning. Keeping her warm is crucial. To continue keeping her awake, this man says, I'm going to ask you questions and you squeeze my hand once for yes and twice for no. And in doing this, he found out not just one, but two men were responsible. He asked what car, and she traced the letter R. He guessed Renault, and she squeezed for yes. He asked the color, she traces Y. He says yellow, she squeezes yes. The ambulance finally arrives. Again, this is another 90 minutes into Allison's ordeal. Her road hero promised not to leave her, and when they got to the hospital, he let the doctors take over and promised her he would be there when she woke up. The surgeon who operated on her had absolutely no explanation for how she had even gotten to the point of being on the operating table with the injury just to her neck alone, not to mention the time it took for the ambulance to come, for her getting to the hospital, and in the operating room. It's 5 a.m. now at this point, and she had been found at 2:45 in the morning. Miraculously, Allison pulled through. When the police arrived to take her statement, she was beyond ready to tell them everything. I mean, Warrior doesn't even begin to touch on this woman's strength. They asked if she thinks she could identify her attackers, and she says without a doubt. They brought a book of mugshots for her to flip through, and at the bottom of one of the pages, she sees Franz' photo. She points to it, and she says, that's him. Franz Dutoit and Tiens Kruger were picked up at their house, still asleep from what they had just done. They had no idea that Allison was still alive, and the detective is like, we're here for your involvement in an attempted murder. And they're like, attempted? Who? And the detective says, your latest attack just hours ago. Yeah, she's alive and identified you. It was Tiens who confessed and went through everything with the investigators first. And he said that day, Franz and him were drinking and decided they wanted to find a pretty girl with a nice car to rape and kill. Just a plan among friends. He told them they originally couldn't find anyone on their initial drive, and so he was dropped off at a party while Franz carried on the search. He goes on to explain that after their brutal assault and attempted murder on Allison, they left her to die, went home, had beers, and then went to bed. I mean, how you could sleep is beyond me. Allison went through agonizing healing to try and be able to function again. She moved out of her apartment where she was initially kidnapped, and someone who had heard about her attack had moved her into an apartment in a gated community to make her feel safe. And at this point, I was like, oh, I needed that reassurance that there was still hope for humanity after hearing this story. Slowly but surely, Allison found her way again. She went back to work after only 2 months. She also prepared for trial, ready to just nail them, even through the physical and mental pain that she was still experiencing. Trial had started on June 12th, 1995, and Franz had been preparing for a defense leading up in the weeks to trial to say that he had been taken over by demons when the attack happened. Ultimately, though, both men were convicted on 2 counts of rape, 2 charges of indecent assault, and 2 of abduction, and further charges of attempted murder and theft. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, there was a law that passed in South Africa that anyone sentenced to life after October 2004 were able to earn credits and possibly have the chance at parole. And they won the appeal that grants them the chance to apply every 2 years for parole, which is devastating because it's something that Allison has to have on the back of her mind and prepare for every 2 years. Now, they have been denied all of their attempts thus far, and thousands have signed petitions to help keep them behind bars. But again, this is something that Allison will continue to face. Now, I just want to finish with Allison herself. She embodies every element of strength, courage, and fight. She was one of the first women in South Africa to ever show her face as a rape victim, and her story and willingness to share it is so important and has affected and helped so many victims who felt ashamed or alone. She's also written a book about her life and what happened, and she tours the world bringing awareness and helping victims everywhere. Her book is an extremely powerful read. Her vulnerability to share, not just what happened through her attack, but the after effects of what happens behind closed doors was really eye-opening and emotional. Allison also went on to get married, and against all odds, due to the injuries she sustained to her stomach, she had a baby boy. And if that wasn't heartwarming enough, 12 years after her attack, the man who saved her life on the side of the road had now become a doctor and assisted her OB in delivering her second child, another baby boy. Today, she is a single mom and still travels the world bringing hope to others. I'm going to finish off with sharing these words that stuck with me from Allison in her book titled I Have Life, and the importance of living your life on terms and not waiting for someone or something life-changing to push you towards your goals. Allison says, "The truth is, we do not have to wait for a life-altering experience to come along before we make changes to our lives. You don't have to go where I went in order to see the value of your life, the value of other people's lives. We can all begin by trying to become more conscious of the world around us, of what life has to offer, and what other people can mean to us. The lessons will keep coming. They are unstoppable. And we can either choose to ignore them, or we can heed the wake-up call and open ourselves to them."
Bob Mata from Defense Diaries is in the library carriage, Wendy. His legal insights bring a unique perspective to our journey.
Much like International Women's Day brings a unique perspective to understanding women's issues across the globe.
Imagine, if you can, arranging your beloved child's funeral, which is absolutely a parent's worst nightmare. But Mari McCourt has spent more than 36 years fighting to do just that. It all started on a wild, stormy night on February 9th of 1988. As gale-force winds battered the Northwest, an anxious Mari, then 45, stood at the window, anxiously waiting for her daughter, Helen, at that point a mere 22 years old, to arrive home from work. Now, she was a dream daughter in so many ways, such as if she ever missed the train or the bus, she would always call her mom from a payphone so as to not have her worry. But as the hours passed and her favorite lamb chop dinner dried up in the oven, there was no phone call and no Helen. Call it a mother's instinct, but Mari knew something bad had happened. So she rang her work, her colleagues, bus companies, train lines, and even hospitals, terrified that Helen had been hit by flying masonry. After retracing Helen's entire journey home and finding no sign of her, Mari went to the police and tearfully reported her daughter missing. The police, well, they took her seriously, and by the next morning, Helen's face was all over the news bulletins. 2 days later, the local pub landlord, Ian Sims, was arrested. Marie was stunned when he was charged with her murder, despite Helen not being found. Sims went on trial the following year. Forensic and circumstantial evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming. Traces of Helen's blood had been found in the private quarters of his pub, just 100 yards from the family home in Bellinge near Wigan. Forensic experts found one of Helen's earrings in the boot of his car, and carpet fibers from the pub were found on her clothes, which had been located in a dump nearby the riverbank. A flex of wire found with her possessions, thought to be the murder weapon, was also traced back to the pub. Sims also had scratch marks on his face and gave a false alibi for the hours that he was missing after Helen's disappearance. The court was also told that Sims, a known womanizer, despite being married with 2 children, was angered at being turned down by Helen. It's been long believed that he had lured her into the pub as she walked past the establishment on that night, at which time he then strangled the life from her. The conviction made headline news around the world. It was only the 3rd murder trial since World War II to be held in the UK without a body. It was also the first murder conviction to be secured without a body using newly discovered DNA technology. Now, after Sims was jailed for life, Mari prayed he would end the misery by revealing where Helen had been hidden. But his cruel silence continued. Only Mari's strong Catholic faith and the desperate need to find Helen kept her going. Bolstered by the unwavering support of her large family, she spent years carrying out painstaking searches. They dug fields, they crawled along rat-infested drains, they drained ponds and emptied mine shafts brick by brick, all to no avail. In 1992, Mari wrote to Sims begging him to end her torture. His reply was abusive and threatening, promising revenge on his release. Mari and her husband John devoted their lives to voluntary work, supporting the families of victims of homicide, and over time realized that their situation was no longer rare. Now, the advances in forensic science meant that more killers were going to be convicted without bodies. What it also meant is that those very same killers were going to go to even more desperate lengths to cover up their deadly crimes, exacerbating the pain of their victims' families. As Mari knew only too well, being denied a proper goodbye to a murdered loved one meant that there was never any closure, ever. Grief was perpetual and never-ending. With Sims now applying for parole, Marie was horrified to learn that there was nothing to stop the killers of missing murder victims being freed once they had completed their sentence. In December of 2015, she launched Helen's Law, a campaign calling for no body, no parole. Her petition received 750,000 signatures of support. Mari quickly learned that in the UK, human rights laws make it impossible to deny a killer freedom. However, the next best thing was ensuring that the parole board judges took non-disclosure of information as to the victim's whereabouts into account when considering release. As a result of Brexit, general elections, and COVID, it took 5 long years. But finally, the Prisoners' Disclosure of Information Act was added to the statute book. Sadly, however, the legislation came too late to prevent Sim's release, and after 32 years in prison, the murderer walked free. But Mari was comforted to know that the legislation in her daughter's name would make a difference to other families following in her footsteps. And she was right. So far, 4 parole applications for killers of missing murder victims have now been turned down. 2 years after his release, Sims died, taking his dark secret with him. Mari had long accepted that he would never reveal where Helen was. And as she says, the world is a better place without him in it. Mari is now 80 years old and should be enjoying a well-earned rest after decades of searching and campaigning. However, she will never rest, ever, until she can bring her daughter home to where she belongs. In addition to her continuing searches, Mari has also launched a new campaign for new desecration of a body legislation. To take a life is appalling enough, but to hide or to desecrate a body in a bid to get away with murder is abhorrent and causes untold pain to families of victims. Mari firmly believes that tough penalties may well make killers think again before committing these acts, and she hopes that it will prevent other families from experiencing the torture that she has lived for so many years. In November of this year, Mari was presented with an MBE by King Charles at Buckingham Palace for her campaign work. But she says her greatest honor was having Helen as a daughter and ensuring that she will never, ever be forgotten. You can read Mari's entire story in the book Justice for Helen by Bonnier Books. I'd be remiss if I didn't give credit to journalist Fiona Duffy, who has worked with Mari for 26 years. Thanks, Fiona. Take care, everybody.
Let's go look for Lucy from Dip In and Out with Lucy. She's near the rear of the train, taking in the scenic countryside.
Lucy's approach to storytelling, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, mirrors the essence of International Women's Day, highlighting the extraordinary in every woman.
Mary Turner Thompson. International Women's Day is about empowering women, and Mary Turner Thompson is someone whose story captured me from the moment I heard her speak at Crimecon in Glasgow last year. Mary's story starts in April 2006. She's married to Will, who is a CIA agent. She has 3 children, and life is going pretty well. Okay, well, there are a few blips. Will has been set up by the CIA as he tried to leave the service, and that morning, Mary was anxiously waiting for a phone call from Will's female lawyer to let her know the outcome. So when the phone rang and a female voice asked, "Are you Mary Turner Thompson?" she waited with bated breath to find out if her husband was coming home or if he had gone to jail. Nothing could have prepared Mary for what she heard next. "Are you also Mrs. Jordan?" the caller asked Mary. Mary, confused, said yes.
And then came the words that would change Mary's life forever. The words that made her feel like she had been punched in the stomach. The words that made her head spin, her body crumple, and her mind race. I am the other Mrs. Jordan. This was followed by, have you been told I'm an agent? Yes, Mary replied. The voice on the other end of the line said, I was told you were an agent. After a long phone call with the other Mrs. Jordan, who Mary refers to as Michelle, Mary was reeling. She agreed to meet up with Michelle, put the phone down, and then didn't know what to do next. Her head was spinning. She couldn't take in what had just happened, but she knew that Michelle had been telling the truth. So, despite Michelle telling her not to tell anyone what was happening, Mary picked up the phone, called a close friend, and asked for help. Her friend dropped everything and raced over to Mary's, where she told her everything. And as Mary spoke, she could see all the lies that Will had told her over the years falling into place. She was married to a lying, cheating psychopath. She was married to a bigamist. Mary was a single mom and hadn't long been back in the dating game, but Will sounded fun and relaxed. And Mary immediately felt comfortable. He described himself as 6'1" tall, mixed race with curly hair, brown eyes, and an athletic build. He was interested in literature, music, and art, and he loved to dance. He was looking for a long-term relationship, not just a quick fling, and was upfront about the fact that due to a complication with mumps as a child, he was unable to father children. He sounded perfect to Mary, and Mary was hooked. They would email each other multiple times a day, chatting and flirting. You know how it is when you're in a new relationship. Mary was falling for Will. It was time to take the next step and speak on the phone. Mary gave Will a number, and he promised to call within half an hour. Mary waited in anticipation, and she waited, and she waited. But no call came. She emailed Will, no answer. She emailed again. No answer. Mary was worried. What had happened to Will? Had he had an accident? What if he was dead? Maybe he'd changed his mind. But why? She barely slept. Her mind wasn't on work. What had gone wrong? 2 days passed, and then Will got in touch and said he'd had to go on a business trip. Mary was furious, and she told Will that was it. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. And as Mary's anger subsided, she gave him the benefit of the doubt. And the rest, as they say, is history. As Mary spoke to her friend after the phone call from the other Mrs. Jordan in April 2006, she realised that there were red flags right from the start. From that very first failed call, well, actually right from the point that he'd said he couldn't father children, and the lies, the coercive control, the gaslighting just kept coming. Here are just a few of the awful events that Mary was subjected to over the years she knew Will. He missed multiple dinners with friends and family, often just not turning up or cancelling at the last minute, saying he had to work. Mary would receive a message through MOD Relay, a system that CIA apparently used to contact family of agents to keep them up to date, to say he was alive and well and would be in touch when he could. And no, he didn't really work for the CIA. In June 2001, while Mary was pregnant with their first child, which was obviously a bit of a shock as he said he was infertile, they planned their wedding for a few weeks later, booked a venue, Mary bought a dress, the invitations went out, and Will vanished. 2 weeks later, she got a message from MOD Relay to say that he was alive and well, and that was it. The wedding was cancelled. Will was away from July 2001 to May 2002, saying he was working in Israel and the West Bank with the Israeli intelligence to keep ahead of suicide bombers. He didn't send any money home during that time, so Mary was on her own. She gave birth in February 2002, with Will acknowledging how excited he was to be a father by email a few days later. The couple finally married on the 26th of October 2002. It was a modest but beautiful day. All was good. Will was leaving the service. He'd been offered some consultancy work, and they were now married. And it was then that the control that Will had on Mary increased. Now he started asking for money. It started with a loan of £7,500 a few weeks after they got married. Will needed to help his parents pay a hospital bill, and Mary needed to clear the overdraft she built up when Will was away. Mary hired a car in her name, which Will said he needed for a few days, but actually turned into months, only returning it when Mary threatened to call the police. Will was working all the time but wasn't getting paid. Mary didn't understand why, but Will always had an explanation, usually that he was going to get a huge payout in the end. In order to pay the bills, Mary ate into her overdraft until the bank put a stop on it when it reached $7,000. With a promise of money from the sale of a house Will owned in the US, Mary and Will decided to move to a bigger flat and put down a deposit. But when it came to transfer the money for the purchase, Will disappeared. In the end, Mary had no choice but to pull out. It cost her £17,000. Finally, in November of 2003, a year after they married, Will set up a company as an IT contractor and soon had a contract that would bring in $6,000 to $10,000 a month. Off the back of this, they bought a new car on hire purchase in Mary's name, of course. Will's work was good, but his behaviour was erratic and he lost the contract. The money kept pouring out of the business. His promised lump sum payment didn't arrive. It was all getting too much. Mary wanted it to stop. She had to borrow money from her parents. She had loans and an overdraft. She couldn't go on like this. So she did the only thing she could. She put her beloved flat on the market and in August 2004 sold it to clear all of their debt, leaving some savings to live on. But within a few months, it was all gone. Will had spent it all. There was nothing left. Will and Mary's life carried on for the next 18 months. They had their second child. There were more lies and there was more debt. Which takes us to that phone call from Michelle on the 5th of April 2006, where Mary uncovered even more lies about her husband. Michelle had told Mary that she'd been married to Will, who she called Bill, for 14 years. Michelle had 5 children with Will, plus he had fathered 2 children with Michelle's nanny. In fact, Michelle, her nanny, and Mary all had 4-year-olds. So they had all been pregnant around the same time to the same man. Michelle was not the only person to come forward with the story about Will. Mary has written 2 books about her experience, The Bigamist and The Psychopath. Both are an absolutely fascinating read. Many people in Mary's situation would be browbeaten and defeated, but Mary has fought back. She has shared her story to help others and also runs a community called the Book Whisperers to help others to write and publish their own books. She's a true inspiration, and by sharing her story, will likely help others who find themselves in a similar situation.
And now, back to our compartment. It's our turn, Wendy, for Foul Play Crime Series.
Let's share our story, Shane. A tale that resonates with the spirit of International Women's Day, a fight for justice and equality. It was February 1990 and Anne Ming arrived to take her grandson to nursery. She had been helping her grandson's father, Andrew, since her daughter, Julie Hogg, had gone missing 3 months before, after a night shift delivering pizzas. Andrew had moved into Julie's house to keep things as normal as possible for their 3-year-old son, Kevin, but the house had been shut up for a few weeks, and there was a funny smell he just couldn't get rid of. On that morning, it was particularly pungent, and nothing he tried got rid of it. In fact, it was getting worse.
In Anne's book, For the Love of Julie, she describes that morning.
"Have you got rid of that smell?" I asked, as we went through into the kitchen. "No," he said, "it's getting worse." "Oh, get out of the way," I said. "I'll go and see for myself." I left Kevin chatting happily with his dad in the kitchen and marched upstairs to investigate. Wondering why men are always so useless at these sorts of practical things. Halfway up the stairs, the stench reached my nostrils. I'd been working for 20 years in an operating theatre by then, and deep inside, I knew what it was. But my brain wouldn't let me accept that it was possible. There must be some other explanation. A dirty sanitary towel, maybe, wedged in a corner somewhere and rotting away. Whatever it was, please God, it wasn't Julie. It was as if I was outside my own body, seeing myself going up those stairs and into the bathroom, as if I was watching a CCTV screen. I'm told it's called a psychic numbing, a condition caused by intense shock. There couldn't be anything that bad in the house, I was telling myself, because the police hadn't found anything. 5 forensic officers had been there for 5 days and had found nothing.
Anne reached the bathroom and started trying to find the source of the smell. It seemed to be coming from the bath panel. Anne's book described what happened next.
I knelt down and pulled at the panel so that I could peer behind it. Even though it was wrapped in a blanket, I know what I was seeing was a body. The stench billowed out, filling my lungs and making me retch. I let go of the panel, allowing it to spring back into place, and scrambled to get back onto my feet out of the room, stumbling down the stairs, screaming hysterically for Andrew, the smell filling my lungs and my head, unable to control myself, not even enough to protect Kevin. "She's under the bath," I screamed, as I half ran and half fell into the kitchen. "She's under the bath."
But a mother finding her daughter's decomposed body behind a bath panel in a house that had been thoroughly investigated by the police and forensic team was not the end of the horrors that Anne was to endure over the next 16 years. Let's go back to the 15th of November, 1989. Anne arrived at Julie's house to pick up Kevin. Since Julie's separation from Andrew, Anne had been helping out with her grandson when Julie was working late, delivering pizzas. There was nothing unusual about that day, other than Julie was due in court the next morning to apply for a legal separation from Andrew. Julie asked Anne to call her at 7:30 in the morning to make sure she didn't oversleep. But when Anne called at 7:30 a.m., there was no reply. Anne drove around to Julie's house. The curtains were closed. She'd obviously overslept. Anne knocked on the front door and shouted through the letterbox. There was no sounds from within the house. Anne drove to the phone box down the road and called again and again and again. Julie wasn't a deep sleeper, but there was no answer. Anne drove back to the house and asked neighbors if they had seen Julie. She went back to the phone box and called the house again. Nothing. She called a few of Julie's friends, but no one had heard from her. Anne was starting to panic. Her gut was telling her something was wrong. She called her son Gary for help. He came around and managed to get into the house, but Julie wasn't there. Nothing looked out of place. It didn't look like Julie made it home. Anne called the police, but they weren't interested. As far as they were concerned, Julie was just another young woman who would have gone out, had too much to drink, and ended up going back to a friend's, or hooked up with someone she had met that night. And when the police did eventually take Julie's disappearance seriously, they found nothing.
On the 14th of February 1990, not even 2 weeks after Anne discovered Julie's body under the bath, the police arrested one of Julie and Andrew's friends, Billy Dunlop. Billy was part of a gang known locally as the Crazy Gang, who would cause trouble wherever they went with their rowdy behaviour. It was 15 months later that Billy appeared in court, charged with Julie's murder. He pleaded not guilty, and the jury failed to reach a verdict. His case was reheard in October 1991, but the jury didn't feel like there was enough evidence to convict him without reasonable doubt, and Billy walked free. Anne was devastated. She was 100% sure that Billy killed her daughter Julie, but what could she do?
In August 1997, 8 years after Julie's murder, Billy was jailed for 7 years for attacking his pregnant former girlfriend and her new partner. And it was while he was serving time for this crime that Billy confessed to a female prison officer about killing Julie. In April 2000, this landed him back in court, where he was convicted of perjury and was jailed for a further 6 years. Anne was over the moon. Surely, this meant that Billy could now be tried again for the murder of her daughter. But no. In England at this time, the double jeopardy laws meant that Billy could not be tried again for the same crime when he had already been acquitted. Anne was furious and in disbelief. How could this be the law? Billy had confessed. How could there be no repercussions? And this is when Anne knew what she had to do. She was determined that no other family member would find themselves in the position that she was in right now.
Anne started a campaign to get the law changed. She went public with Julie's story. She contacted everybody: leading politicians, police officers, journalists, friends and family. She told everybody what had happened and the injustice of this 800-year-old law. And in May 2003, 14 years after Julie's murder, Anne not only got the law changed to allow a case to be reopened if new evidence came to light, but she got the law changed retrospectively. And this meant that with the confession being new evidence, Billy could be retried. In 2006, Billy was retried for the murder of Julie Hogg and convicted to life in prison. Our late Queen agreed that Anne Ming is an amazing lady and awarded her an MBE in 2007 for her incredible battle to get justice for Julie and her tireless campaigning to get the law changed. We're pulling into King's Cross Station. This journey, much like the history of International Women's Day, has been a tapestry of stories, each unique yet part of a larger narrative.
Thank you, friend, for joining us on this special collaboration. Remember, the stories of International Women's Day, like those we've shared today, remind us of the continuous journey towards equality and understanding.
If you'd like to join Shane and I, along with the other podcasts you heard in this collaboration, at Crimecon, partnered by True Crime in London, you can go to crimecon.co.uk. Every show has its own unique code, so make sure you check out the show notes to give you the best discount we can. The event runs September the 21st and September the 22nd, 2024. See you there.
All of the podcasters you heard from in this episode are listed in order in the show notes. And if you're a fan of this collaboration, there is a link to a few more that I've put together. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.